Okay, so the new chapter is out, Forged in Fog, and that comes with a new survivor, a new killer, and a new map. And I made a video when this chapter came into PTB, and I expressed my worries for the killer. I didn't think he was that great. I didn't really understand how his power was meant to be used. I understand what it was designed for, but in terms of being efficient, he wasn't really that good. And I paid no attention to the survivor, because that's just how chapters are, I guess. And since the chapter came out, I have put some time into both the survivor and the killer, and I can say the chapter is not as bad as it was in the PTB, but it's still certainly not great. I first want to start out by talking about the new survivor. The new survivor's perks I actually think are extremely slept on. I think Fogwise has the opportunity to be one of the best information perks in the game. I think potential energy is a fun concept, and it's actually won me a couple games. It definitely is strong if you know how to properly use it, and his other perk is it's not something I'd recommend running on solo queue. Then we got the Knight. His perks are not that great. I think Hubris can make for some interesting palette related builds. I think his Hex perk is really confusing, but when it works, I guess it does its job. And his other perk is essentially the One Dredge perk. Let's talk about the Knight, because that's really the main focus on every chapter in Dead by Daylight is the killer, because with every new killer is new ways that you're supposed to play the game. The Knight is essentially a poor man's artist. He is really good at zoning survivors, and that's really where he excels. You place your guard down and then you force the survivor to either run away or stay and get hit. If they run away, well then you have an opportunity to catch up to them, but if they stay, then the guard will come after them and kill them. The Carnifex, I think, is one of his best guards. It allows him to kick pallets, doors, and generators while still remaining mobile. I think the Assassin can be fun when he does what he's supposed to, and the Jailer, while not interesting, offers some slightly interesting gameplay alternatives. I don't really know how to feel about the Jailer. His add-ons are probably the most wonky I've ever seen in a killer, and it mainly just revolves around the guards. This killer doesn't seem to have that bad add-ons. The ones that afflict status effects are probably his worst ones. He has a lot of opportunities for experimentations in terms of add-ons, but where the killer is really falling flat for me is mainly just outside of his power. He is a typical M1 killer, and he's a killer with such a cool concept that gameplay actually fires back on him. There's a lot of stuff about this killer that should be cool, but it never works because it's inherently designed to be against him. When you summon a guard, the survivors can see the patrol path, so that makes the element of surprise nothing. They did give him a couple buffs in terms of making the guards spot survivors quicker, making them float towards survivors quicker. All of that is nice and dandy, but the actual core mechanics of his power have been untouched. Every single guard is still extremely slow in hunts. The hunts are still extremely short. Even the Assassin, who's supposed to be the best at hunting, can barely hit survivors unless they purposefully mess up. And as for the Knight himself, there's not really a whole lot that he can do. He relies on these three guards that in their own rights can't even do that good in chase. The idea of chasing two survivors at once is cool, but at the end of the day, you're just wasting two survivors' times, and one of the survivors has an extremely easy out. That's not to say that the Knight doesn't have his moments, because he definitely does. I think at certain loops he can be extremely strong and put a lot of pressure on survivors, but in order to set them up for those opportunities, it takes a lot of just wasting time, and that's the biggest issue with the Knight. And it feels that certain times using your power does nothing but waste time. If you set up a Jailer in a bad position, that's 24 seconds that you don't have any power, and that is pretty bad. I know the Knight wasn't made with zoning in mind. There's no way, because his power is a lot more complex than that. The artist was made with the intention of zoning out survivors. The Knight isn't, yet that's still the strategy that is best for him. It feels like only one of your guards is meant to be used for hunts, but still, even him, he's not that great. He's still extremely slow. It's still extremely easy to get rid of the hunt The pathfinding on the AI guards are so bad. They'll sometimes just break out of the patrol path and do their own thing. These are issues that I've never seen in the PTB, but yet they're happening now. Guards will always get stuck on the terrain and will just walk away from the path, and it just makes them literally useless. They are just another one of Nemesis's zombies at this point. And that still doesn't change the fact that the literal counterplay to the knight is just another hold W. If he uses his power, just run away from the tile. One thing about the knight that really annoys me is the fact that he is extremely good at camping. It's almost like his power was specifically designed with camping in mind. And yet again, he's another killer that suffers from a playstyle that requires him to be extremely scummy to get results. I've only played against a handful of knights, and they do not have good games at all, unfortunately. Again, this is all a big shame because the knight is definitely the coolest looking killer in my opinion. I don't care for the new map. A lot of the maps have been ruined. There's a lot of like fat shame positions now, and just the general terrain and geography of these maps are awful now. Do not be surprised if you find yourself hitting against something or just not being able to navigate anymore. The knight himself definitely has a couple of bugs, but overall I think he functions fine. It's just I really don't know. Yeah, it's just a shame. I really dig Knight's design. I think his power has the ability to be extremely fun, but yeah, I think overall the general consensus is that this chapter is kind of a mess, but it's a Dead by Daylight mess, so it's not that bad.